Wherever you are in the world, I would like to extend a warm welcome. My name is Julianne, and I am the founder of Wildtype Media Group, a Singapore-based media company. We publish Asia's leading science magazine, asianscientist.com, in print, online, and on social media. I am personally joining you today from Singapore, where a large number of the 5.6 million of us are on some form of lockdown, originally intended to be until May the 4th. And then yesterday, our Prime Minister told us that it will be extended to June the 1st. So I'm very glad that I have something to do in the meantime, and I couldn't think of anything better to do than to talk with Prof Langer today. Before we begin, here are some technical notes. Firstly, all attendees are in listen-only mode. And just a reminder that today's session is being recorded. If you have questions for Bob, please submit them at the Q&A section at the bottom of the screen. I can see we have 1,500 participants right now, and the number is climbing. Alternatively, you could raise your hands virtually to ask questions during the live question and answer round using the palm icon at the bottom of your screen. So our guest today is none other than the MIT Institute professor, Prof Langer. Bob is joining us from Boston, Massachusetts, where he runs the largest engineering lab in the world. Named by Forbes as the Einstein of medicine, Bob is also the academic co-founder of US biotech Moderna, which has a COVID mRNA vaccine candidate in phase 1 clinical trials. Bob has one of the brightest minds of anyone on earth, and I've always wanted to interview Bob. I was Bob's graduate student 10 years ago. And now, 10 years later, this feels like a perfect time. So I'm just going to invite Bob into the room. Hi, Bob.
Hi, how are you doing?
Can you please turn on the video?
Oh, okay. Let me see what I can do.
Sorry, I put you off
Start
the
my
video.
video. Okay. I think I see it. Is that? Oh, good. Okay.
Wonderful.
Great.
Hi, Bob.
Hi.
I'm glad to see you. How are you and your family doing? Is everyone okay?
We are. Yeah. Right now, we're actually in our place at Cape Cod, where you were once, I think, for our, where we had the summer retreats. But
I remember.
I'm on the phone or Zoom most of the every day. But it's we're all doing fine. We're healthy, and there haven't been any problems.
I guess I would like to also find out, how is the Langer Lab doing? Is it business as usual? Is there a reduction in activity? How is everything?
Yeah, so, well, basically there is MIT in general, there's a reduction in activity. So right now, almost all the work that people are allowed to be doing has to be kind of COVID related. And we're doing quite a bit that's COVID related. So there are a number of people going in, but it's still, I mean, nothing like normal. I mean, and people have to stay a good distance away and, wear protective things and so forth. So it's definitely different, though. Nonetheless, we have a seminar today, as we usually do most Wednesdays. And Vikash, one of our really good postdocs, is going to be speaking on his work. And so, so we're keeping on different activities with different lab things, but still it's not the same.
Yeah. Well, I was there when it was a full house, and I remember all those wonderful memories. I think Bob, it will give us a lot of comfort to know that MIT scientists are working hard on solving COVID-19. Is there any COVID-related research that you can share with us going on in the Langer Lab? And I guess also broadly speaking across MIT.
Yeah. Well, actually, there's a lot. I mean, first, I mean, as you mentioned, we helped start Moderna, and Moderna's in clinical trials with the nanoparticle mRNA vaccine. Secondly, there in our own lab, for example, we have a lot of different activities. GeoTraverso and others are developing new masks. Actually, a lot of myself and a number of people in the lab, we've been working with New Balance. It's a sneaker company.
Yes, of course.
And they were actually on CNN. But they have converted a lot of their sneaker production to face mask production.
That's brilliant.
And so we're doing a lot with. We've been doing a lot with them on advice and testing, and they've been wonderful. New Balance. There's a lot of work several people have been working. Shreya is one of our postdocs, and Khalil and Gio Traverso on developing ways to split ventilators. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe many
Yes.
people be safely treated with this. This is more for the developing world where they have very few, and in some cases, no ventilators. And then one of my former postdocs, Ziad, he's actually developing an ultra cheap ventilator.
Mm-hmm.
And then other companies that we're involved with are developing, new non-invasive blood tests. The 7sense, they've got a way to just that the FDA approved to now draw blood with microneedles that doesn't really hurt hardly at all. I mean, David Edwards, one of my former postdocs, he started several companies, Pulmatrix, and now another nasal delivery company, and he's done amazing work with Denny Asiello and I've helped some, trying to develop a new antiviral nasal spray
Mm-hmm.
that I think I mentioned to you earlier, and so there's all kinds of stuff going on in the lab where we're trying to help different people and on this, and through and MIT itself, there's lots of work. I know different people in the chemistry department are developing new drugs for COVID, and there's other ventilator work and other mask work. Elazar Edelman, who was a former student, he and his team have developed, also new masks. So MIT has been super active in trying to do whatever it can, and that's to me that's very, very important.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thanks for the update. Um, Bob, you have a mind that people look to for these kinds of situations. I'm just going to ask you a very broad kind of blue sky question before I get into the nitty gritty, which is how do you think the world will be different when we get through this pandemic? I'm thinking everything from fast track drug approvals. How about immunity cards? Uh, what are the positives that we will see once we come out of this on the other side?
Yeah, well, that's a great question for which there's not a simple answer. I mean, I think the things you mentioned are certainly some of the things we'll see. I think we're going to see a lot more, you know, I think people doing more things to protect themselves are going to be important. I think, masks are going to be, more important for lots of things. I think, new vaccines, new diagnostics will be very important. And I think, some of the communication tools we have, including like what we're doing today, I think is,
Zoom.
is, yeah, I think Zoom is done very well at this time, but they're not the only one. And I think that all these things, the world will be very different, and I hope more prepared for the next time something bad happens.
Well, I can't wait to go into the public live question answer round. But before we do that, I'm going to try now that you mentioned, I'm going to try a fun Zoom feature, which is to poll the audience. I'm going to launch a poll, which all of you can see now, which is what is your industry background? Are you from biotech, pharma? Are you a student or postdoc? Academia? Are you a medical professional, a VC, journalist, government official, or others? Okay, I can see the numbers are quite dramatically going up. We have 800 students or postdocs here. Just going to give you 3 more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, share results. I think all of you can see we have clearly 15% are from biotech and 56% are students or postdocs, and academics, and the rest make up a smaller chunk. Thank you for that. I'm also going to go to a second question just to get your sentiments. How confident are you that pharma and biotech companies will be able to develop an effective treatment or vaccine for COVID-19 in the next 12 months? In 3, 2, 1, go. Hmm. So I think our audience is skewed towards being a little bit optimistic and pragmatic at the same time, but definitely not uh, the other way. So we have 43% of you who are very confident and 48% somewhat confident. So I think, Bob, we have quite an optimistic crowd, don't you think?
Yes, but I'm glad that people are optimistic. As you said, there's a lot of young people and students, and I think that optimism is great. I mean, we'll just have to see what happens.
Great. So we received hundreds of questions in the registration round. I thought, Bob, I would send you some of the questions that I picked up from the registration that I thought was interesting. Um, I'm just going to start with a very broad question that seemed to be quite prevalent, which is some of the engineering students wanted to find out if they were not biomedical majors, how could engineering students and engineers, of course, contribute towards combating COVID-19? This was a question from Krishna from the National Institute of Technology, Karnataka in India.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question. And actually, some of the things I mentioned that we're doing, I think, are good examples of that. For example, nanotechnology. Nanotechnology has been key, actually, to delivering mRNA, for the mRNA vaccines that you mentioned. And actually, other technologies are very important, too, for delivering vaccines. For example, Anna Jacquelenik in our lab, and actually Mark Prousens at Georgia Tech, former student, they've done a lot with microneedle vaccines. And so that's important. Joseph Kim, one of our undergraduates, he started a company called Inovio, and they're using electricity to drive DNA into the skin. They're also in clinical trials now for vaccines. So that's one example. But then, masks are actually a huge area. I think, to me, that designing better masks, safer masks, I think that's another area that's really important. And then I mentioned ventilators. I think the idea of coming up with better ventilators, certainly much cheaper and easier to use ventilators, or even oxygen masks could be very useful. Then and then the idea that I mentioned of splitting ventilators, which is, I think, and doing it safely is important. And you could go on and on. Like when I mentioned blood tests, that's also used with microneedles. So engineers can play just an enormous role, I think, in almost every aspect, whether it's diagnostics, therapeutics, delivery systems, medical devices. So I think there are many, many ways that they can contribute.
Even robots. I saw a remote control UV disinfection robot. They sent it into the building and it disinfects the whole place. So remote control.
I think that's a very good example too. I mean, robotics and artificial intelligence, all these things are, involve engineering. And I think there's all kinds of advances that are being done. At MIT, as we have a building now where we have half engineers and half biologists. And, I think that's been wonderful, that the Koch Institute for Integrative Cancer Research. And I think that, I just think that that's been terrific place for all this kind of interdisciplinary work.
Great, thanks, Bob. Okay, I have more questions. Since we have a large number of academics, so I'm going to ask this question from Amir Manbachi, an assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University. Bob, do you have any advice for young faculty trying to choose the direction of their research career amidst all these uncertainties? I think the same can be said for first-year PhD students as well, trying to decide what their thesis will be on.
Yeah, well, I mean, my goal always has been, and that includes you and Chester, always to ask the question, what can you do that you think will have the greatest impact? I mean, from either a basic science standpoint or applied science standpoint, and that impact could be something that you discover. It could be, a new kind of invention or device or tool. I don't know that my philosophy's changed. In other words, I think today, obviously, certainly we're certainly seeing that one of the areas that's just incredibly important are ways of treating these pathogens. But actually, you know, that's actually something, you know, our lab for the last 8 years, we've worked very closely with the Gates Foundation on doing exactly that, you know, and that continues. I mean, they've been wonderful in terms of, you know, Bill and all, Dan Hartman and Lola Wood and all these people have been wonderful. And I think that helping the developing world is really important, but impact, that would be my guide, whether it's now or 10 years from now or 10 years ago. And, you know, and I think that impact, like I say, could be basic or applied.
So I'm going to go to, thanks Bob for that. I will go to some maybe more technical questions. There seem to be quite a number. How about this one? I thought it might be interesting. Maybe you can even do a show and tell of some of the devices. What is your opinion about the impact of mucosal immunization in treating COVID-19? This is from Leonard Lindfors, a principal scientist, AstraZeneca R&D.
Yeah, well, I think certainly that's an area you want to explore. I mean, I think that mucosal immunization, you know, is very important. In fact, I remember when Maria Alonso was in our lab, she was doing work on nasal delivery with nanoparticles. The delivery system is certainly one of the key issues on that. You know, and I think also safety. If you want to make sure that you're protecting whatever you're delivering. You want to make sure that there's no safety issues, but I think it's very important. I think I was also mentioning to you before that David Edwards, who was one of my former postdocs and now professor at Harvard, and Denny Ausiello, they've been working with Palmatrix and a new company they've started to develop, and I've helped a little, to develop a new nasal spray that you know, is antiviral. And I was showing you that, and so that's, I think, what you meant. So I'll show you what David invented. And it's you know, it's this little device here, but the idea is that you just turn it upside down like this, and the spray comes out, and it's got certain salts in it, and actually he has also put fragrances in it. It's amazing what, he's a super creative guy, and so he you can take that, and they've shown at least with certain viral diseases that it's been very effective. COVID has not been tested yet, but certainly if it works on that the way it worked on others, it could be very useful. So I know that they prepared a paper, and I've helped, like I say, on it. That's been sent in for submission.
Well, congrats. I hope it goes. I'll be looking forward to reading it. I'm looking at the Q&A field, the live Q&A field, and someone called Job Elogia. I'm sorry if I pronounce your name wrongly, Job. Reportedly, there are 30 mutations discovered for SARS-CoV-2. What does this imply for vaccine development and drug discovery for COVID-19? How does this impact the vaccine candidate in clinical trials right now?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I'm necessarily expert enough on that. I mean, I think, you know, to me, there's lots of people who are probably much more knowledgeable, you know, immunologically than I am. But to me, you know, a lot of what people are aiming at is, even if they're mutations, if you're able to attack a part of the, you know, the virus and use that, like, let's say an arrowhead, if it's spike protein, you know, if you're able to attack that and destroy it, I mean, I think that hopefully will make it effective. So I think the question is the spike protein there in all those cases?
I'm asking. I received a bunch of upvotes for a question from a software developer, Caleb, or Technical University of Munich. How can software developers, how can technologists help medical professionals and healthcare workers in finding treatments or vaccines for COVID-19?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question. Let me just give an example or two. You know, like, one thing that's been done, and people may know this, is Google DeepMind. Like, they were able to have algorithms that could predict the 3D structures of a protein, you know, based on its genome and genetic sequence. So that's certainly one way that's been very, very useful. I also think you can use artificial intelligence to help on different things. So, for example, I mean, this isn't directly COVID related, but I think it's a good example. You know, at MIT, my colleagues, Regina Bargeli, who's an expert at artificial intelligence, and Jim Collins, who's an outstanding bioengineer, you know, they published a paper where they used deep learning and artificial intelligence approaches to predict a whole new antibiotic that was very, very effective. And so I think you can use those kinds of approaches to help in almost anything. You know, as people may know, MIT now has a whole college of artificial intelligence, and they're, you know, hiring different people to develop these kinds of things for different problems. But I think that there's a lot of ways that people like that you mentioned can contribute in a big way.
Okay, great. We have many people raising their hands. I recognize one name, Ali Kademo Hosseini, otherwise known as Ali K.
Oh, there I say him.
Ali, how are you? You have a question for Bob?
Good, Julia. Yeah, hi, Bob. How are you doing?
Good. Great. It's great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you here as well.
Congratulations on your new position. That's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Really appreciate it. Obviously, this is a crisis that nobody in our lifetime has ever seen. And every day that goes by, I think it's just incredible how much damage people are feeling. So one of the things that we're going through right now is this debate about how much we should kind of bypass some of the traditional approaches to get drugs approved or vaccines approved, to get them to the hospitals, probably in some kind of an expedited way. What are your thoughts about what should be done in this aspect, and whether, you know, FDA or other places should bypass some of their original kind of approaches?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, you know, and I've certainly talked to the FDA about that. I think they're doing what they can. I think the FDA and the NIH in the US, I think they're moving as fast as they possibly can. You know, I talked with both, you know, with Janet Woodcock, and I think she's terrific. And obviously I've known Tony Fauci for years, and I mean, he's also terrific. You know, I think these people are doing everything they can to move it along as fast as they can. At the same time, you know, the concern is, and I think, you know, we see this with, if you try to take a brand new thing and it's not tested, I mean, it could kill people. And I think, you know, you want to be very, very careful about that. So my feeling is that they're doing, I mean, from everything I've seen, I think they're going as fast as they can, but, you know, but I still think the issue is about doing no harm. I mean, so I think you're absolutely right, but I think everybody that I see, at least the ones that I know of, are trying to balance this as much as they can. They're working, all these people are like working all the time. I mean, it's incredible, you know, how hard they're working, but so that's my personal feeling.
Thanks, Bob. And thanks, Ali. I see another person whom I want to invite, Sarah Hudson.
Thanks, Juliana. I'm not sure, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Sarah. What's your question? Please introduce yourself, by the way, and your name and your organization for the rest of us.
Well, so my name is Sarah Hudson. I'm from the University of Limerick, and I did a postdoc with Bob about the same time as Juliana, so it's great to see them both looking so well. So thanks for this. It's fantastic. Bob, I suppose, you know, many countries are taking different approaches to lifting lockdown restrictions now, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the best approach. And in some ways, other than flattening the curve, which everyone has been trying to do, and reducing the pressure on our hospitals, in the long run, until a vaccine is found, do you think the different approaches will make much of a difference in terms of infection and death rate? Or what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, well, that's also a very good question. I mean, my personal feeling is lockdowns are key. You know, I think you want to just wipe it out as much as you can. I mean, and I think if you're too lenient, then it's just going to start up all over again. I'm hardly any expert. Again, there are people who are a lot more knowledgeable than me. But I just think logically, if you start opening up everything before, when still a number of people have this. I mean, that's how it happened in the first place. And so I think you got to do everything you can to make sure that it is locked down. And if it's locked down for, you know, a month, several months really rigorously, and that knocks it out pretty much, I think that to me is better than the alternative. I'd rather, I mean, to make it sort of simple, I'd rather be safe than sorry. I think what's been done, we are sorry because it hasn't been handled carefully enough in enough places. So, but that's just my personal attitude. And, you know, I'm not an expert. I mean, there are a lot more knowledgeable people than I who are, I'm sure, opining on this. But if it's a choice, let me put it this way, if it's a choice between economic things for a few more weeks and life or death, I take life or death. And I think in the long run, that'll have a more positive effect on the economics too.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I'm going to invite another person to ask a question. This is Matthew Chu. Matthew Chu, if you're listening, I'm going to give you audio privileges. What is your question?
Hi, Matthew here.
A bit louder, please. Please state your name and your organization and your question.
Hi, this is Matthew Chu.
That's better.
Okay, hi. I'm from Singapore Airlines. So, but my background was with A-Star in Singapore, doing immunology as well as mass spectrometry. So my question is, what do you think the conditions are where people will be allowed to travel, you know? Because I think it seems that the lockdown will ease, but then travel will not really happen until much later. But what do you think the conditions would be?
Yeah, I think that's just a really good question, and I agree. Well, first, I know it's Singapore Airlines is a great airline. So it's outstanding, and I certainly know A-Star. I think we've had a lot of great people from it, Julia. You know, just wonderful people. I think you're right, but I also think that this is another opportunity where really, in fact, I've talked with one of your colleagues, Fida, who's with Tomasic at Singapore, and I really think that masks, you know, developing good masks are a terrific opportunity, and that's, I think, something that could really change, you know, things on the airlines. I mean, if you really could come up with excellent masks that, you know, maybe better versions of the N95 masks or other things, I think that could have a big effect on it. So I do agree with you, the sentiment that you're saying. I worry about airline travel, any kind of thing where there's a lot of people gathered. So I do feel that that's a really important thing. And like I say, other things that I mentioned, like antiviral sprays or other things, could really, I think, help on all that. But I think the general point you're making, I agree with.
Another question from David Nguyen. David, if you're hearing this, I'm going to give you audio privileges. Question, please. Name, organization, and question, please.
Hey, Juliana. Hey, Bob. It's David Wynn at UCSF in San Francisco. I have a question about vaccines. Is one of my favorite things that we worked on together. And I was hoping it could be a little bit of a technical question. We know that DNA vaccines have been around for decades, but really haven't come into clinical human use. And then now that RNA vaccines like Moderna's have rapidly entered clinical trials, I was just with a lot of fanfare. And I was just curious, like, what is it about the delivery aspects or just any aspects of RNA vaccines that seems to make them a little better than DNA vaccines?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I'm necessarily the best person to answer that either, but it's a very, very good question. I think with the mRNA vaccines, you know, they were able to make them very, very quickly. They've been able to deliver, and of course, Moderna has done terrific work. They've developed all kinds of modifications of the RNA that can, you know, really affect its stability, activity, and so forth. So, I mean, the chemistry that they've done there has been incredible. And I also think they've done a wonderful job on developing the nanoparticles. They've had wonderful scientists like Melissa Moore and others and some of our former postdocs and graduate students who you've known worked on it over time. And so I think I think that they've done just a great job on both the chemistry and the delivery. So I don't know that it's any mRNA vaccine. I think it's, but these particular mRNA vaccines, they as people could see, they were able to make it quickly. They have a tremendous manufacturing facility, and like I say, all kinds of chemistries and all kinds of delivery systems that they can pick and choose from.
So Bob, I think we'll take just a few more questions. There are many hands raised. 50 hands are raised. We have more than 2,000 people now listening in as we speak. I'm just going to go invite, okay, I recognize this person, a former colleague of mine at NTU, Singapore Nanyang Technological University. If I'm not wrong, this is William. William, if you're listening, I'm giving you all the privileges. What is your question, please?
Hi, Bob. I'd like to ask a less technical question. It's like we have seen SARS, the damage done by the SARS virus infection. Now this COVID-19 seems to be far more damaging. But moving forward, my sense is that with all this climate change, global warming, there may be new viruses that will come out to cause damage. How can we deal better with these new pathogens in addition to lockdown and shut down the country and the economy? Thank you.
Thanks, William.
Yeah. I think that's a very good question. Bill Gates, of course, who, like I say, we work very closely with, predicted all this. He gave a TED talk that I remember seeing in 2015, basically saying all this was going to happen. And just like what you said, it's going to happen again. So I think you have to be really prepared for it. I mean, you have to be ready with good diagnostic tests, good vaccine approaches. You also have to have the attitude that this is really, really important. I mean, that this is an enemy. People spend unbelievable amounts of money on military things and other things, computers. I think whereas people don't spend, there's concerns about spending money on these kinds of things, and so I think you have to have, be really ready, have good masks, have good ventilators, all kinds of things. You have to be ready with vaccines. You could have, and you have to have the delivery systems for whether it's nanoparticles, microneedles. You have to have, you have to be ready. You have to have things in place, both scientifically, industrially, and policy-wise, so that if it happens again, we are ready for it. And like I said, Bill Gates is a brilliant person, and he certainly, if you go back to that TED talk, anybody can get it. It's just absolutely brilliant. Sadly, that he predicted all this kind of stuff would happen, and we weren't prepared for it. I mean, the world.
Certainly not the first, not the last to come. I have, I'm going to invite, let me see who I can invite next. This name I recognize as well. A former colleague, Xi Qiaoping. If you're listening in, we're allowing you to speak, and I've unmuted you.
Yes. Hi, Julianne and Bob. So this is Qiaoping Xu from Tufts University. So I have a follow-up question to David about the vaccines. So there are a lot of the approaches developing the vaccines, whether it's DNA, mRNA, and also the adenovirus. So those things, I'm pretty sure, confident that they can generate the antibodies. So from the FDA point of view, so what data that the FDA wants to see before they can approve for the vaccines, whether it's mRNA or the DNA, and also from the like the practical perspective. So what metrics to show that they see it better than the other approach, or what are the successful metrics for a variety of the vaccines in the development.
Maybe if you can answer one of them.
Yeah, well, I think basically, as people may, I'm sure the industrial people know, but basically, you know, what you do on these trials is you do what's called phase 1, which is a small population of patients for safety, and that's ongoing now. So far, that's looking good, at least on the one that I know, the Moderna one. You know, and they've done 3 doses. You know, and I'm sorry, three different levels of patients. The second thing that gets done is what's called the phase 2. That's a small population of patients for efficacy. And then the third one is a phase 3, which is a larger population for both safety and efficacy. You know, and you'll figure out the dose for that in the phase 2 trial. But that's how it progresses. And then, you know, it goes through those trials, and they will look for safety and efficacy. They'll also look for ultimately, you know, they'll want to check the manufacturing plants and things like that to make sure that they're in good shape and so forth. But those are the kinds of things that the FDA at a very high level will look at.
Thanks. Thanks, Xiaoping. It was nice to hear from you. It's been 10 years. Another person I'd like to invite is Elbaz Madavi. Elbaz, are you listening?
Yes. Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, great. Hi, Bob.
Hi.
I actually had a different question. I was wondering how Michael is doing. I know he's working on an app that a lot of people can access, and that seems like a very powerful technology right now. We're all stuck at home, and you know, if we need access to a doctor, that seems like a very useful technology to have. And so, what are your thoughts on those types of technologies now really showing their use?
So you mean Michael, my son?
Yes.
Yeah, so he's doing great. Well, he's working at a company. I mean, that's actually a very interesting area, you know, digital medicine. Michael's actually working at a company called Pear Therapeutics, and they've actually developed apps for getting people off opioids and other kinds of things, and the FDA's even approved them. And I think that whole area is very exciting. I mean, digital medicine, you know, there's a Achille, which is part of PureTech, and I've been on that board. I mean, they have these video games now that, in fact, they just mentioned, I think there was just a press release last night that now the children can use them to get help with attention deficit disorder. In fact, Michael worked there for a summer too. And then there's a company called Odin, which I've been on the board of, and they actually are using Sesame Street characters and other things to help people with you know, lazy eye, but they're coming up with all kinds of new treatments using these kinds of things. So I think digital medicine is a very, very exciting area. So yeah, and Michael said loved this job, and I think Pear's been terrific. That's just really, you know, they've a couple hundred people doing, I think, very exciting futuristic things.
All right.
So thank you, FM.
I'm just going to go for one lucky last question. Sean, are you hearing us? A quick question, please. Name and organization.
Yes. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yes, so I'm from TBWA and Phenotype. We're a communications agency. So the question is probably to both of you. We have a lot of innovation.
We can't hear you, Sean.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, please again, the question.
Okay, sorry. So the question is to the both of you. So we have a lot of innovation at the moment and a lot of new innovations that we talked about. I was wondering, how do you wish these were communicated against other innovations which might not be as credible or as viable, but still touted out there? So how do we sort the wheat from the chaff?
Thank you.
Do you want to answer, Julie, or should I?
I think this question, I think, Bob, you go first. I have a little bit to say about that. Yeah, but I can tell you I'm working much harder now during the COVID pandemic than before.
Right. Well, I think you have to look at things that are scientifically credible. I mean, if somebody's published things in scientific articles, I mean, I think that to me, if something's been approved by the FDA, I mean, to me, those are, I would use criteria like that from separating the wheat from the chaff. Mm. You know, I think when there's good science done, you know, that to me is always the important thing. And I I would judge it by those two things. You know, reaching certain milestones with the FDA. Peer-reviewed grants, I guess, would be a third one. I mean, if you got grants from important agencies like the NIH or BARDA, I think that would be very important. I think if you had publications, that would be very important. And obviously, if you advance along the lines of the FDA or a similar organization, that would be important.
Yeah, I mean, evidence-based results, and that would be the best thing to listen to right now, definitely. And read asianscientist.com, maybe. I do my best to write about accurate, non-sensational stories. Well, we've since run out of time. Thank you, Bob, for joining me as a guest on our Expert Opinion webinar series. For those of you who enjoyed our session today, we have a guest next week. We will be talking to Dr. Magdalena Skipper, Editor-in-Chief of Nature Journal, on
Great.
April 30th. I'm sure, Bob, you know Dr. Skipper.
Yes.
And she will be talking about publishing during the COVID era. I'm sure you can imagine it might be very challenging to do your lab research right now, especially. So if you're interested, you could register in the same channels as you registered for today on our Facebook and LinkedIn social media accounts. Bob, on a personal note, it was great to see you today. My family and I, Chester and I, wish you all the best with your research, and I look forward to seeing you again in Boston or in Singapore, which also means I can travel again. So thank you, Bob. Thank you, everyone. Signing out from Singapore.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.